Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Hemminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, hits, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAOddsBreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by 5 Dimes. I'm Brian Hemminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts line setter Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC Fight Night 48 event, which takes place in Macao, China. If you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will be breaking down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Then fight scientist Reed Kuhn will step in and offer his expansive numerical insight on all bouts with sufficient data. Today, Reed will be able to contribute on 2 of the 10 total bouts. Now, pay attention to our MMAOddsBreaker staff picks article because we might make some changes depending on the weigh-in, so that will have our official fight picks. Now, briefly looking back at the last event, UFC Fight Night 47, our premium package went 1-2 to lose 2.575 units overall. We won our bet on Ross Pearson, but we lost a totals parlay after Brad Tavares got knocked out by Tim Boetsch, and we lost the opening bout on underdog play on Nolan Tickman. Back to the present, UFC Fight Night 48 features a 10-fight card in total and will be aired on UFC Fight Pass this Saturday morning. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking off the preliminary card is a women's bantamweight contest between Elizabeth Phillips, who is 4-2 overall, taking on UFC newcomer Milena Dudieva, who is 10-3 overall. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public chip to things so far?
Dudieva opens a favorite, minus 150. The comeback on Phillips, plus 110. Right now, the lines are all going to be courtesy of 5dimes.eu. And right now, according to 5 Dimes, Dudieva is minus 165. The comeback on Phillips is plus 145. So a little bit more action coming on Dudieva. I'm not really that surprised. I mean, Dudieva has that kind of hype buzz around her as a serious prospect for the women's bantamweight division. She's pretty well rounded in her skill set. She's strong. Tends to be a little bit inactive at times, I think, like more patiently waits for her opponent to dictate the pace of the fight, especially on the feet, and then looks to counter a little bit more. But she has decent stand-up, decent power on the feet. But I think her best attribute by far is her submission game, her ground game, her transitions on the ground, and her fight IQ overall. The girl definitely has a will to win, and she's very talented as far as her well-rounded skill set. She's going to kind of have difficulties here in Phillips. I know Phillips made her UFC debut against Letourneau. She looked very good. She lost by split decision, but that was mainly due to the fact of her fading, and her cardio kind of gave up on her more than anything else. I think if she could have went 3 strong in that fight, she probably would have won that fight. Now, that being said, Phillips is a type of fighter that's always improving. She's physically strong. She's a grinding type of fighter. She's not really great anywhere, but she's just in your face all the time, likes to push the pace, has a little bit of power, until she starts fading. Then she tends to backpedal a little bit, but she's very tough, as evident in her last fight as well. But again, that cardio is a little bit scary. Now, she is going to have a full camp for this fight, so I'm expecting her cardio to be improved, a little bit more as she took the fight last time on super short notice. So this should only help a little bit. She does have to travel, so that could come into play here, of course. But I'm on the fence with this fight, honestly. I'm going back and forth. I'm going to go with the slight underdog here in Phillips because I think she is going to be the one pushing the higher pace. And if she doesn't get caught in anything, I think she is probably going to grind out a close decision win over Dudieva. I think Dudieva's best shot is probably beating Phillips by some type of submission. And if Phillips, again, if she doesn't get caught, I think she probably wins a close decision. So I got to go with my head and thinking that Phillips's aggression and her grinding type of style will be a little bit too much for Dudieva because she does let others dictate the pace sometimes.
Letting others dictate the pace is one of the faults of Dudieva. I do think that right now she's the more dangerous fighter. Dudieva has some decent power in her right hand. I think she's a little bit better than Phillips on the feet in terms of technique. And on the ground, she's definitely more dangerous in terms of submissions. I mean, she'll give up position to attack. She's a little too comfortable off of her back, but she will dive on heel hooks, and I think that's going to be very dangerous for a young, raw fighter like Phillips. Phillips, she's 27 years old compared to Dudieva's 25, so both of these girls are pretty young, although Dudieva does have a lot more experience against better overall fighters. So you got to take that into account as well. Now, one other thing, while Phillips does have a full training camp this time, She, even though she took that last fight on short notice, she had just fought, so she was still in fight shape, and she hadn't taken any damage, so even though she was still in fight shape, she gassed really badly. And who knows how she's going to respond having to fly overseas all the way to China, while Dudieva only has to, saunter over from Russia. So a lot closer, a lot less travel time. I think it'll be a lot easier for Dudieva here in terms of the new scenery. Phillips, she's physically strong. She's a pretty good athlete, but again, she's very raw. If she lands anything on the feet, it'll be more just because she's pushing a pace and being aggressive like she was in that first round against Letourneau. But I think Dudieva can make the better adjustments in this fight. Dudieva does have more talent. And as long as Dudieva doesn't just get held down for 3 rounds or just outworked for 3 rounds, then I think Dudieva's going to end up pulling this one out. Phillips just has a little bit more work to do in terms of adding that skill set. I think she got brought to the UFC a little too early. So my pick is Milana Dudieva. Now, staying in the bantamweight division, but moving over to the men, we have Yao Zikui, who is 1-2 overall, taking on Royston Wee, who is 3-0. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Wee minus 265, Zikui plus 185. Right now, Wee is minus 280 and Zikui is plus 240. So a little bit more action coming in on Wee early on, and I was actually not surprised by the initial action on Wee. I think there's a little bit more of a buzz around him, a little bit more, I guess, of some kind of hype. I know a lot of the diehard fans aren't too high on Wee, but I think it's a winnable fight for Wee for sure. I mean, his wrestling is the best attribute for him, and that seems to be Zikui's weakness, honestly. I mean, he's definitely improving in that aspect of the game, but it's going to be that kind of style of a fight. I think Wee's going to be a little bit physically stronger. He's going to be a little bit more the guy that looks to push the pace and get the takedowns. He's got decent top control. He needs to work on the feet a little bit more, but because he's just not that talented. He's just not much of a threat on the feet. That's why I'm saying that. But he should be improving in that area as well. With time, of course, I'm expecting that. And again, he should have a little bit of a strength edge. But overall, Zikui, I think, is actually probably the more well-rounded fighter, the better fighter. He's a tough China, of course, semifinalist. He does, again, have a well-rounded skill set. He's also basically a wrestling, grappling-based fighter as well. He's just going to have a little bit of a disadvantage again against Wee here. But if Zikui does get top position, I mean, the guy's very heavy-handed. He's got nice ground and pounds. His takedown defense is a little bit suspect, though. That's what's going to, I think, ultimately probably cost him decision here. Really, I think he should be fighting at 125 and not at 135. So I'm expecting him, if the UFC doesn't cut him, if he loses this fight, to probably drop to 125. But I think he's going to give Wee a little bit better fight than he had in his debut. I think it's going to be a close competitive fight. Zikui's going to be game. He's going to come to fight. And I wouldn't be shocked if he does pull off the upset here. But, I mean, looking at it as plain and simple as you can, I think it's Wee's fight to win or lose because it's going to be him dictating the wrestling and the pace of the fight. He does tend to gas, though, a little bit, so it's going to get interesting in the later rounds, but I have to pick Wee in this spot.
Yeah, and I'm in complete agreement in all your reasoning. Zikui's the younger fighter, and he was actually a pretty bright spot on Tough China, has some decent skills, and he's actually the more dangerous fighter than Wee. When he's on top, he goes for submissions, he has some pretty good ground and pound, but his problem right now is he's still just a little too sloppy and raw, and he loses scrambles, he winds up on bottom, he can get swept pretty easily, and he's not that comfortable on his feet yet, although he has more power than Wee. Now, Wee, the first fighter out of Singapore, 27 years old, trains out of Impact, he has good wrestling and good top control. He still has a lot more things to add to his game before he's a complete fighter, but right now that's really all he needs, especially with the competition that they're throwing him against. Wee should be able to control this fight with his wrestling, get takedowns, stay on top, grind Zikui out, and probably win the decision. But Zikui is doing some things correct. He got out of China. He spent this training camp at Tiger Muay Thai, so he's definitely adding more to his game, but I don't think he's caught up to Wee's wrestling just yet, so he's probably going to wind up on his back a lot in this fight, unless he gets a big shot that he lands or something that's unexpected. Then Wee probably will end up riding this out. So my pick is Royston Wee. Now moving up to the welterweight division, we have Wang Angying, who is 2-1 overall, taking on Colby Covington, who is 5-0. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Well, I'm going to go with just calling these guys Wong and, of course, Covington here to make it a little bit easier on me. But anyway, I opened up Covington as a favorite, minus 305, the comeback on Wong, plus 225. A little bit of action early on coming in on the dog, actually. The line dropped a little bit now, though. You're looking over 5 dimes. Covington's back up to minus 330, so a little bit more support coming back in Covington's way, and I think that's probably the right side. Covington, of course, is a very hyped prospect. He's training with American Top Team. He's got a collegiate wrestling background, 2-time NCAA All-American, if I'm not mistaken. And, of course, we got to mention this. He's a former roommate of John Jones. So, I mean, there's just a lot of buzz, a lot of hype around this guy. And from what I've seen in footage, I mean, it's pretty legit. The guy's definitely a very capable grappler, a grinder. He's improving stand-up. He is a southpaw on the feet, too. He's got a little bit of power. But he's not going to look to stand and bank too much. He's going to look to close the gap with his striking and look to take Wang down. So getting into Wang a little bit, though, he is a striker. This is basically your striker versus grappler type of matchup. Wang has the striking background. He's got some decent skill on the feet, no doubt about it. He likes to push forward, patiently waits to attack. Kicking attack is a huge part of his game, and he's got some power with it. He can basically knock you out with his hands or feet if he catches you for sure. But ground game is his weakness. He's improving his takedown defense and his ability to scramble back to the feet. And he knows that Covington's a wrestling-based fighter, and he knows what to expect in this spot. But I still don't think he's going to be able to stuff the takedowns. And I think Covington's probably going to get enough control at some point, maybe even submit him. If not, Wang will probably survive enough, and Covington, I think, will grind out a decision win. So I really do think, again, the early action and where the line is now at minus 330 or so is right. And Covington's probably going to be the side here. I'm expecting some good things about Covington. Again, all the hype and everything surrounding him, I think is probably going to be pretty true.
Yeah, and I'm in complete agreement. Covington is light years ahead of Wang at this point. The problem here is, Anying he's just not good enough on the ground yet. He has so much to catch up to. You know, in terms of stand-up, he's not bad. You know, he's a pretty good combination of kicks. He has decent counter-striking ability, but his ground game is just very lacking. You know, if this fight stayed on the feet at distance or even in the clinch, you know, Anying has decent Muay Thai. You know, he could land some decent strikes, but I don't think he has the type of power that can put away Covington, so Covington really doesn't have a lot to worry about unless he just dives face first into a knee. And Covington is just probably going to manhandle him with wrestling. As Nick mentioned, you know, he's got the All-American wrestling background, fantastic top control, very powerful, and trains out of American Top Team with some killers. You know, he's best friends with Jorge Masvidal, so you know he's definitely learning from some really good, talented, and experienced fighters. And both these guys are young, so Covington has a lot of room for improvement still. I think he's going to be a really solid addition to the welterweight division. The only thing I'm worried about with Covington is his history of hand injuries. You know, maybe he breaks his hand on Anying's face or something, or the top of his head in a striking exchange. But I still don't think that would be enough to make him lose this fight. So Covington should absolutely roll. This is probably the biggest mismatch on the entire card. Now, dropping down to the bantamweight division, we have Roland Delorme, who is 9-3 with 1 no contest overall, taking on Yuta Sasaki, who is 17-1-2. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
It's a great fight. Really looking forward to this one. I opened Sasaki, the slight favorite, minus 140, to come back on Delorme, even money. Since that time, basically, line got a little bit tighter. Sasaki's minus 120, even money on Delorme. So, two-way action, keeping the line pretty steady here. And I think it is about a pick'em type of fight. Sasaki's the hyped prospect coming into this one. I mean, he's a Shudo rookie champ, I believe in 2010 it was. Has spent time training actually at Alpha Male too. So, I mean, he's got the buzz surrounding him, and he actually, you know, went to the States and trained with Uriah Faber and crew to get a little bit better. He's long, he's rangy on the feet, uses jab well to find at that range. He's got decent footwork. He doesn't have a lot of power, though, on the feet. But he does have some speed, and you know what impresses me about him is his little knees from the clinch, man. They're super fast. He brings them up with good timing, good accuracy, and just powerful for those little short, quick knees, definitely. So I think Delorme's got to watch out for those. And again, Sasaki, I think his best attribute, though, is on the ground. He's got solid grappling. Good takedown defense, good scrambles, good reversals. He attacks with subs everywhere. But the problem with Sasaki is he can be put on his back, and he can be controlled a little bit against good grapplers, and that's exactly what he's going to get with Delorme. Delorme, of course, we know what he's all about. I mean, Delorme's a very solid bantamweight. This is almost a must-win fight for Delorme, and he's taking the road trip here, so this is an interesting spot for him to be in. I think as far as stand-up edge, I got to give the edge to Sasaki in this fight overall. But Delorme, he can definitely land and tag Sasaki. His hands are a little bit improving more so, I mean, as he progresses in his MMA career for sure. He is 30 years old, though. I should mention that, and Sasaki's only 24. So Delorme isn't going to be improving as fast as Sasaki, but we do see some glimpses of improvement with Delorme's stand-up for sure. But Delorme's wrestling, I think, is going to be a little bit better than Sasaki's. His overall grappling game is going to be there as well. And I think Delorme's experience level, I know Sasaki's fought a bunch and against solid competition, but Delorme's still been battle-tested in the UFC, and I think his experience and the people that he fought in the UFC is what's going to probably edge him out in this fight. I think he's going to get the W here. I think it's going to be a close, competitive type of decision, but I do see Delorme probably squeaking it out. Now, I was going back and forth on this fight a little bit because Sasaki is the hype prospect again. He's got a bigger upside for sure, but I'm not quite sure if he's ready for Delorme at this point. I think Delorme's a little bit more of the solid fighter, and I think it's kind of his fight to win or lose. So if he manages to stay off his back, I think Delorme will control most of this fight and probably squeak out the win.
And I'm going to disagree here. I think that this is just another pretty good hyped Japanese prospect stepping in there and looking to make a splash. And unfortunately, this is the second straight time UFC's done this to Roland Delorme. His last fight was against Tanaka, and he got out-grappled and out-wrestled and beat up over the course of 3 rounds. Tanaka looked great. And I think Sasaki, while he doesn't have quite the wrestling of Tanaka, I do think he's a little bit more well-rounded in terms of the stand-up and submissions and everything else that he kind of brings to the table. Now, Sasaki, as Nick mentioned, just 24 years old. He was the Shudo champ of Japan. Very talented fighter. Good grappler. He got first place in the Asia ADCC trials. And at 5'10", he's a very large bantamweight. He's actually a little taller and longer than Roland Delorme, which is pretty rare. Most guys are not as long as Delorme. Delorme, This is a bit of a problem for him because in terms of the stand-up, while he has gotten a little bit better and he has a little bit of pop in his punches, he's very stiff on the feet, very robotic at times. And I think as long as Sasaki keeps his distance and uses good footwork and speed, he should be able to just dance circles around him on the feet. And while I don't expect him to get a knockout because Delorme is very tough, I definitely see Sasaki outpointing him on the feet. The ground's going to be a little different. I think Delorme, it evens out pretty good, and Delorme probably does a really good job of coming on strong later after his opponents, tire out from beating on him a little bit. But I do think that Delorme will hold his own. He might even have a slight wrestling edge here. So potentially he could get Sasaki on his back. So that is Delorme's method to victory, I think. But I think that Sasaki is well-rounded enough and competent enough that he should be able to win the decision here. So my pick's going to be Yuta Sasaki. Now moving up to the welterweight division, we have a pair of UFC newcomers in Alberto Mina, who is 10-0, taking on Shinsho Anzai, who is 8-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Mina minus 185, the comeback on Anzai, plus 145. And right now, Mina is minus 185, the comeback plus 160. So again, another spot where it's been two-way action, steady action, line tightened up a little bit as well. This is a tough fight. I mean, Mina's been the one that's another hyped prospect. He's actually been in contract disputes with Bellator, I believe, for like 2 years now. So he finally, got out of that contract. He was supposed to make his UFC debut against Cummings. Cummings missed weight by a ton. That fight didn't happen. He had another fight change here as well. So poor guy has been, hasn't really been able to focus on one opponent, the entire time. Anzai coming in on short notice, of course. So this is interesting here because Mina, again, the hyped prospect, he's a judo and BJJ black belt. He's a pretty good fighter overall. I mean, the hype kind of lives up to it from what I've seen because the guy's pretty well rounded on the feet. That's not his best attribute, but he's very effective there. He mixes things up well with his hands and his feet. But again, his grappling ability is what impresses the most. he can get the fight to the floor, and when he does, more times than not, he ends up getting the sub, or again, he can pretty much grind you out. In fact, he hasn't been to official decision in his career. I mean, he's pretty much a finisher. But he's going to have problems with Anzai because Anzai has a wrestling background, in his own right. The guy's dropping down to 170. He was a beast at 185. So at 170, he should, even though it's short notice, which scares me a little bit, but he should be a beast at 170 as well. He's got a ton of power. He's a Pancrase actual middleweight champion. And he's basically your striker, brawler type of fighter with a little bit of a grappling base. He's very aggressive. He does have, again, the freestyle wrestling background in Japan. He's even competed in Abu Dhabi, which is pretty impressive. But his strike defense scares me a little bit. He does tend to get tagged pretty often. He's able to, he has been rocked in the past as well. But being said, I think on the feet, he is going to have the edge because he's such an aggressive fighter and he's so powerful that I think he's going to try to make this thing a slugfest on the feet, and he could probably land. So Mina's going to have to be cautious here, because he's not going to be able to just manhandle, I think, Anzai, especially early on. Maybe when Anzai fades a little bit, Mina's going to take over and maybe finish him there. So a tough one. I could see the dog definitely coming through here, but as far as a pure pick goes, I'm going to have to lean a little bit more towards Mina. I just wish this fight, both of these guys had full camps and Anzai wasn't coming in on short notice because it would be that much funner, I think, of a fight, but slightly lean towards Mina in this one.
Yeah, and I'm along the same lines. Mina's just had a little too long of time to prepare for this fight. Training out of Hong Kong, even though he's a Brazilian, he's one of the top talents that fights out of Asia. And as Nick mentioned, he was supposed to make his UFC debut earlier this year, but it wasn't his own fault. I mean, it was Zach Cummings' fault. He is a grappling-based guy with some power, and he has that judo background. So, very interesting fighter, really talented, and he should have been made his UFC debut a long time ago, honestly. And Anzai, he's actually a very interesting prospect here. Based out of Japan, as Nick mentioned, the Pancrase middleweight champ actually vacated the championship because he wanted to drop down to welterweight in the first place to fight for that title, and then he got the UFC call. He'll only end up having about 8 days in total to prepare for this fight after accepting it around August 13th. So that'll be very difficult for him, especially against somebody as experienced as Mina. So I think it's going to be a very difficult fight for him, but Anzai does have a really good background for the type of guy making his UFC debut. He has some power standing, he has a really good wrestling background, some nasty ground and pound, and he's fought guys bigger than him. So I think that Anzai definitely has a shot here to pull off the upset. And if he had a full training camp, you might even favor him. I'm not sure about that, but it would be a lot closer. But due to the short notice and everything, I'm going to lean Mina, and we'll see what happens. But my pick's going to be Alberto Mina for this one. Now, the final fight on the preliminary portion is another welterweight contest between Wang Sai, who is 7-5-1, taking on Danny Mitchell, who is 14-5-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Mitchell minus 265, the comeback on Wang Sai, plus 185. And right now, actually, it's Mitchell minus 220, Sai is plus 180. So, again, a little bit of movement on the dog, but not much. The line basically got a little bit tighter. And again, I think a lot of people from top to bottom are a little confused on this card. You really have to do your research here. And this is kind of a difficult one to do. But you got to break this fight down like it is. It's basically another striker versus grappler matchup. Mitchell is going to be your grappling-based fighter, and he's very good at what he does. I mean, the guy's he has actually decent wrestling. Now, against better wrestlers, of course, he can be put on his back. He can be controlled, obviously, his debut. But that being said, I think Mitchell, more times than not, against the normal type of striker, is going to have a super advantage as far as getting the fight to the floor. And then once he has the fight to the floor, you got to be very, very defensive with his submission attack. He looks for all sorts of stuff: leg locks, arm bars, triangles, reversals. The guy's definitely slick and more than capable of finishing the fight on the floor. That's why he's got 9 subs throughout his career. So it's basically Mitchell looking to get the fight to the floor, and once he does, I think he's going to be able to finish Wang Sai. Now, that being said, Sai, he's working on his takedown defense. He's improving overall for sure. He's a tough China, of course, welterweight finalist. Again, he's known for his striking. He's improved his wrestling and grappling overall, but I don't think it's going to be enough to fend off Mitchell. he does move well on the feet, mixes up his attack well, and he does have KO power. So if he's able to maintain the fight on the feet, he's probably going to be able to finish Mitchell or tag him enough to at least seal a decision here. But make no mistake, I don't expect this fight to really hit the cards. I think either Wang's going to knock him out, Wang Sai's going to knock him out, or Mitchell's going to get the probably submission win or even maybe positional control, ground and pound him that way or something. So I got to lean towards Mitchell though, because I think more times than not, Mitchell is farther ahead of Wang Sai at this point of his career, and his game and his grappling is just going to be far too much for Wang to handle at this point. So I got to pick Mitchell. I think he is going to probably get that sub.
Danny Mitchell is not that good of a fighter. He did not look very impressive in his UFC debut against Raujao. But man, Wang Sai is just so far behind him in terms of grappling that the second this fight hits the canvas, I think it's going to be in big trouble for the Chinese fighter. Sai actually looked decent on the show. He, honestly, I thought he won the Ultimate Fighter China for welterweight, winning the last 2 rounds, but he doesn't have very good takedown defense. He gives up bad positions when he does get taken down during scrambles. He loses scrambles. And really what he has going for him is he has a pretty good kicking game. He has decent cardio and he can come on strong late. But this is just a huge test for Chinese MMA because, while Mitchell isn't that good of a fighter, he is very slick on the ground. And while he wasn't able to pull off the things he wanted to pull off against, a really talented Brazilian fighter in his UFC debut, he's going to be able to do that against Wang Sai if this fight goes to the ground. He will be able to do whatever he wants on the canvas probably. He has a really nasty rubber guard. He has slick transitions. He dives for heel hooks. He has all kinds of submissions he can threaten with. And I think he'll just be able to toy with him if this fight goes to the ground. And really the only way Wang Sai wins this fight, in my opinion, is if, he catches Danny Mitchell coming in for a takedown or catches him on the feet in the stand-up exchange, because seriously, the second this fight hits the ground, Mitchell's probably going to tap him out. So my pick's going to be Danny Mitchell here. Kicking off the main card for UFC Fight Night 48 is the featherweight finals of Tough China. It was delayed due to injury, but finally we have a 145-pound matchup between Ning Guanyu, who is 4-2-1, taking on Jianping Yang, who is 6-3-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Yang minus 265, Guanyu was plus 185. Another tough one here. And of course, actually, the public has shifted things down. Guan Yu is now only plus 165. Yang is minus 190. So more support coming in on the underdog. And I understand it. I mean, this is going to be an interesting fight. I think it's not going to be as easy as most people think. Obviously, the people that are betting this fight early don't think so either. They think it's going to be very competitive, and Guan Yu has a very good shot at pulling off this fight. We're going to start off with Guan Yu, actually, since I'm talking about him right now. He's a wrestling-based fighter with improving stand-up. He's physically strong. He's got a wrestling background in China. He's a southpaw, so he's got some attributes going for him as well. He's an aggressive fighter, likes to push forward, does tend to be a little hesitant with his attack at times. So he pushes forward and doesn't do much, but he has really good accuracy and huge power with his left hand. That's kind of what got him to the finals in the first place. I mean, the guy's a little bit older. He's 32 years old compared to most of these guys, but he's in great shape. I mean, he continues to improve his overall game. And again, just with that left hand, he's got so much power and so much accuracy with it, he can cause problems to a lot of people. Now, Yang, on the other hand, again, he's a little bit more well-rounded in his skill set. He's physically strong as well. He's more athletic a little bit. He's got a Kempo background. Standing up, he moves really well, closes the gap really fast. He's got nice clinch work, solid knee attack, throws to the body as well. So that's pretty impressive. And I think his ground game is also his best attribute. He's got good takedowns. He even picks you up to suplexes people at times too. He scrambles up well, and reverses things well. And he's got a pretty good sub game to go along with it. So really, I think it's Yang's fight to win or lose. I think if he doesn't get caught with that big power, he's probably going to edge out a decision on the cards at least, or possibly, put, Guan Yu in some spots on the floor and possibly find his way to finish here. But it should be competitive, the whole way throughout. I think we're going to probably see a boring fight. These guys are probably going to respect each other an awful lot. And on the feet, at least at the beginning, until they get a little bit comfortable and set in, I think we're going to see a lack of action. I think we're going to see a bunch of bouncing and movement around and nobody's going to want to throw right away. So that could work into Guan Yu's favor there, because if he gets time enough to set up and shoot that left hand in there, man, it's not going to be good for Yang. But overall, I do think that Yang has a better upside, a bigger upside, I should say, and I think he's the better overall fighter, so slight lean towards Yang for me.
And I completely agree in this one. It's probably going to come down to the ground game, and honestly, Yang is just significantly better in terms of the how he fights on the canvas. He has aggressive takedowns, solid top control. He holds top position well, has pretty good ground and pound, and he looks for the finish on the canvas, definitely with submissions and with punches, but clearly he has the much better Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now, the one thing you really have to worry about with Guan Yu is his power. He has a nasty left hand. He knocked both of his opponents out cold in the second round of his fights on The Ultimate Fighter China. So the second that, he lunges forward with that left hook or the overhand left, you gotta watch out, because this guy definitely has fight-stopping power. And nobody's immune to that, and if Yang gets hit, he could get in trouble. So, I do think that he has a puncher's chance, but that's about it. And the other problem with Guan Yu is he's hesitant to engage. I mean, in his second fight on The Ultimate Fighter China, the referee actually got frustrated and yelled at him and told him to engage with his opponent. So I'm gonna think that they'll probably have that same measure of respect and maybe a little bit of hesitancy. And we'll probably end up seeing, eventually Yang gets this fight to the canvas and takes care of business. And I can at least see Yang winning a decision. Now, moving up to the welterweight division, we have the winner of The Ultimate Fighter China, Zhang Lipeng, who is 8-7 overall, taking on Brendan O'Reilly, who is 5-0-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA Oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
O'Reilly minus 165, the comeback on Lipeng plus 125. Now for this one, line basically tightened up again. It's minus 150 now, plus 130. So a two-way support, not a ton of action on this fight either. I think line's about right. Near pick'em with a slight lean towards O'Reilly. These guys are both similar skill set type of fighters. They both like to take the fight to the floor, use their grappling, use their wrestling. They're both very strong for sure. Getting into O'Reilly though, he's a tough nations vet. He lost to Cajun Johnson, in the first fight of the season actually on that show. And you know what? He was actually doing pretty well up until he got caught. He did get a little bit tired. Cajun Johnson got position on him, ended up sinking in the rear naked choke. So defensively, there's definitely some flaws with O'Reilly, but I mean, again, you could see the area where he shines at, and he's aggressive. He's able to get the fight to the floor when he wants to usually, and he's got a pretty good grinding type of style. He has on the feet a nice double lead jab to close the distance and get in there and look for those takedowns. And he also has a crazy chin. I mean, if you look back at some of his fights before The Ultimate Fighter, you can see, I mean, that's not good for his defense, don't get me wrong, but man, I got tagged with clean shots and he just kept on coming forward. It definitely bothered him, but I mean, it didn't, phase him too much. He still implemented his game plan, got the fight to the ground. So O'Reilly's actually pretty tough. I mean, he could take a punch. Again, cardio a little bit suspect to me a little bit. Zhang is going to have an edge there, and Zhang's actually going to have a little bit of an edge in physical size, period, in this spot. Zhang's a southpaw on the feet. He does switch up a little bit though. He's listed as a southpaw, but he's another one of these guys that kind of switches up and adapts to his opponent. Obviously, Zhang Lipeng is also the tough China welterweight winner. A little bit of controversial decision there, but he got the job done. And I think for a 7-7 type of fighter, for about a 500 type of fighter, the guy's not too bad. He's dropping down to 155, which is good to see. He will be a little bit stronger for the weight class as well. And he's definitely showing, some improvement. He's only 24 years old, so he's going to continue to develop his overall skill set, especially his striking. He's got okay hands, but he's got pretty good power, especially in that right hand as well. But he is pretty effective in most cases with his wrestling and takedown game. He seems to be pretty smart on the ground. He likes to dish out some ground and pound and control a little bit too, and looks for a sub as well. So you got two guys that are very similar in skill sets that are going to do battle. I just think O'Reilly's probably a little bit more advanced at this stage still, but this is going to be barn burner. I think if O'Reilly doesn't get him out of there, Zhang out of there quick, it's going to hit the scorecards, and we might see a split decision type of performance, or Zhang maybe finishes O'Reilly if O'Reilly fades or something like that. But I do think it's still O'Reilly's fight to win or lose, because I think he's just a little bit better at this point, and I think he wants to prove that he belongs in the UFC. So it's good that the UFC gave him another shot here, but he is definitely in enemy territory, and that's not going to bode well for him. But I'm still going to slightly pick O'Reilly in this spot.
Yeah, and I can completely understand why you like O'Reilly here. The main thing that bothers me is Lepang just has serious problems in terms of submission defense. He's a pretty good offensive grappler. He aggressively pursues dominant positions. He looks for transitions and guard passes, and every once in a while he will work for some ground and pound and submissions of his own. But his problem is he slows down a little bit. He gives up positions in his own right. During scrambles, he can lose scrambles. And then against people that really know what they're doing on the ground, he gets tapped out a lot. He's got 7 losses already in his young career. 5 of them are by submissions. Several of them were quick submissions. So that is something that he really needs to put some time on. Granted, 24 years old, still a ton of room for growth, so this guy still has plenty of opportunities ahead of him. And, honestly, this is a winnable fight for him. Brandon O'Reilly, he's not a world beater by any means. On the Ultimate Fighter Nations, he, came out really aggressive in that first episode, but he did end up losing in the first round by submission. Now, that doesn't mean that he's a bad fighter by any stretch of the imagination. He's very aggressive. He's a bit reckless. He pumps a pretty good left jab, pursues the takedown, but his problem is he's undersized, he's a little sloppy, and he leaves openings as well. Now, I don't think that Lepang's going to catch him by a submission or anything, but he could bust him open. O'Reilly definitely cuts pretty easily, so that's a concern. He takes damage, he doesn't have very good defense, and he's not a big welterweight. I think he's a natural lightweight, and he just moved up to welterweight to compete on the show, and they kept him at welterweight. So that is something to keep an eye out for. Lepang might be able to wear him down with size and over time, but neither of these guys have very good gas tanks. So I'm going to pick O'Reilly. It's very tough to pick a Chinese fighter against, but Lepang is a live dog here, but my pick will be Brendan O'Reilly. Now moving on to the co-main event of the evening, we have a welterweight contest featuring a pair of top 10 fighters in Tyron Woodley, who is 13-3 overall, taking on Dong Hyun Kim, who is 19-2-1 with 1 no contest. Now Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Woodley -135, the comeback on Kim -105. Line staying pretty much steady. It's -140 right now at 5 dimes. The comeback on Kim is +120. So line got a little bit tighter, a little bit more action coming in on Woodley early on. This is a tough fight, from a betting perspective, because both these guys got their share of flaws for sure, and both of these guys are tremendously talented in what they do. Woodley, a heck of a grinder, heck of a wrestling background, as we all know, and he's got power to go along with it, and he keeps on improving his overall game. And Kim, of course, man, he's been on that fantastic run. We know that he's got the judo background as well. He's world class in that. And as well as getting the fight to the floor more times than not against normal opponents, he's able to control, smother, land his ground and pound, dictate where the fight goes in most cases. In his stand-up game recently, look at his fight against Hathaway, look at his fight against Silva. He's been doing a lot better. He's a little bit more aggressive. He's a little bit more confident in his game. So this is a very dangerous fight for Woodley. Woodley taking his fight on short notice, of course, somewhat of short notice. So I'm expecting some serious fireworks that realistically this fight could go either way, but I'm going to lean towards Woodley because I think it's his fight to win or lose. Obviously he should have the wrestling edge as far as takedowns. He should be able to keep the fight upright. Woodley's hard to get to the floor. He's got that tremendous knockout power on the feet as well. The only problem and concern with Woodley is he does tend to get a little bit inactive at times, and that costs him, obviously. So he can't do that here, but I think he's going to be okay because I think he's going to land enough on the feet, enough power shots that it's going to rock Kim and eventually possibly put Kim out, or score enough damage to win the fight for him as well. But man, if Kim keeps up the pace that he's been going at and as wild and aggressive as he's been, Woodley can be some serious trouble. So he's got to be cautious early on. But this is an awesome fight. Not too many good fights on this card, but this is definitely one of them. So looking forward to it, but my pick's going to be Woodley.
Now, I can see why you like Tyron Woodley. He's more technical, he's a little higher ranked than Kim, but there's something drawing me to Dong-Hyun Kim. Part of it is he is the longer, taller fighter, so Woodley has had trouble in the past dealing with that. And I do think, Kim has had the longer training camp. Woodley is taking this fight on short notice, and these guys are a little bit moving in opposite directions. Woodley had a really lousy performance in his last fight against Rory McDonald, while Kim is, riding some momentum here with those back-to-back, vicious knockouts. Now, one thing that really stands out to me is the ground game of both guys. Woodley, he's usually at his best when he's pursuing the takedown, getting his opponents on their back, wearing them out, looking for ground and pound. And I think Kim can neutralize that if he wants to. He has a really good judo base and pretty solid wrestling in his own right and some really good offensive grappling. Now, lately, Kim has kind of abandoned that game plan. I really thought that he was going to be pursuing the takedown against John Hathaway, but he turned that into a firefight on the feet. And, he ended up winning it. But something really scary about Kim is he's not the most technical fighter on the feet. He's by a landslide. He's actually really wild and reckless and aggressive. And if Woodley's patient and waits for his openings, he's probably going to lose rounds, but there'll be a good chance for him to really crack Kim with a big shot. So me favoring Kim to push forward and be aggressive and do well here, that only works as long as he doesn't get knocked out. Because I do think Kim can win a decision in this fight. I am worried about him walking into something because he is so aggressive and reckless lately. And unless he fights completely differently, then he could get himself in trouble. But I do like this aggression, and it could pay off here against Woodley because it's probably going to win him some rounds. So my pick is going to be Dong-Hyun Kim. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, that aggressive style you mentioned really would play to Woodley's advantage. That's the style that he counted on with Carlos Condit, because Carlos Condit is a big guy. He's able to come forward and throw volume, but he kept walking into things. And Woodley, he has great counters, whether he's changing levels, going for the takedown, or blasting a big, powerful right hand. Either one, you can't protect your chin and the takedown at the same time. When you're walking forward, protecting either one gets that much harder. So statistically, these guys are really, really similar. They're both very powerful. They're both actually, in the long run, they've been more reserved in terms of waiting on their opponents to make the first move. But it's their wrestling that has gotten them through some fights. Their ground control stats are really, really good, almost identical at 90%, with a slight edge to Woodley. But you'd have to think that in terms of pure wrestling, Woodley advantage. And so Kim won't necessarily have that out to rely on round to round. He's certainly gotten control of people on the ground, used his very large frame to tie them up and ride it out. And he's beaten people up like that. But I don't think that approach is going to work with Woodley. So I'm leaning Woodley here, but it is interesting how very similar they are in terms of the numbers. There is actually a size and a southpaw advantage for Kim. And there's also the fact that Woodley had to fly a really long way. He comes from St. Louis. They've had some problems, social unrest in the last couple of weeks. You wonder how much the jet lag is going to affect him. So there are some concerns, but at least in terms of the numbers, they're similar with slight edges toward Woodley. He's going to be the more accurate guy, slightly more powerful guy. And with his wrestling base, I think that really saves him in terms of not getting taken advantage of the way most opponents do with Kim. So, a slight lean to Woodley, and, it'd be interesting if they cancel each other out with the wrestling and choose to bang this out. It would be interesting to see, who goes down first, because they both hit hard.
All right. Excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now, moving on to the main event of the evening, we have a very compelling matchup between Michael Bisping, who is 25-6, taking on Kung Lee, who is 9-2. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Bisping minus 260, the comeback on Lee plus 180, and right now at the time of the recording, over at 5 dimes, it's minus 325 for Bisping, and the comeback on Lee is plus 265. So support coming in on Bisping early on. I do understand it because Bisping is definitely, it's his fight to win or lose. He's the better fighter. He's younger. He's fought overall. I mean, Lee's fought some decent competition, especially as of late. But Well, minus the long layoff here for Lee, but I'm saying overall. And Bisping, way up to a title shot and a deserving title contender. He ran into a few rough spots along the way. He had, of course, that eye situation going on as well. So some difficulties getting in Bisping's way. But as far as being the better fighter in this spot, Bisping is definitely the better fighter. He's got some pretty good stand-up. He moves well. He's a smart fighter, has good fight IQ. His wrestling continues to develop. Defensively, he's hard to take down. Offensively, he can put you on your back if he wants to. Now, Lee, though, he's improved in those areas as well. His takedown defense is getting better. Offensively and wrestling, he's getting better as well. But the guy's 42 years old. I mean, his best attribute by far is his striking. He has got a lot of power. He is a southpaw. Definitely talented in that area, but with the long layoff again, and fighting a guy like Bisping, which is out to prove something because he's coming off that loss, of course, his recent loss. So he needs to get back on track. This fight means a lot to Bisping. So I'm gonna pick Bisping, but as far as a bet goes, I don't necessarily agree with the public betting this fight at such a high price because Bisping's kryptonite has always been that chin.
Yeah, and I completely understand this one. Bisping has almost every intangible in his favor. The only real thing that Lee has here is he's a little bit more diverse with his striking just because of the Sancho background. He's got a very unique set of skills in terms of the stand-up portion. And Lee does have more power. But in terms of youth, speed, quickness, footwork, pace, everything else I think is in Bisping's favor. Now, one thing that you got to be a little concerned about with Bisping is he looked really bad in his last fight. It looked like he got old overnight. Now, we don't know for sure how much of that was affected by his layoff and the eye injury. Or, he's 35 years old too. It's not like he's a spry chicken. So, maybe he's starting to slow down as well. He's taken quite a bit of damage throughout his career after having been dropped and rocked in multiple fights, almost every fight that he's ever been in. So you gotta watch out for that a little bit. Now, one thing that does stand out to me in terms of this bout is it actually feels like very similar to a lot of Bisping fights that he's had in the past, where they put him in there against guys that are going to be slower with big power. And he's actually done very well in most of those fights. You look at it, Brian Stan, Akiyama, Chris Lieben, time and time again, they throw him in there against these guys that you're just expecting to knock Bisping out. And he's usually able to dance around them, score points, win rounds, and usually win the decision. Now, every once in a while he gets blasted by, say, Dan Henderson, but it doesn't happen very often. So you gotta pay attention to that. Lee's method to victory is obvious. He needs to connect with Bisping's face and knock him out, because I don't see him winning a decision. This being 5 rounds, it definitely favors Bisping, who normally is a cardio machine, although he didn't look that good in 5 rounds in his last fight. So you gotta keep an eye on that. But historically, Bisping is very good throughout the fight in terms of cardio. So I'm gonna go Bisping, but you gotta be a little careful just because Lee does have that nasty one-punch power, and he could put Bisping away, and Bisping is a little bit slower now, so he has the opportunity to connect. But I'm going to go with the overall here and pick Michael Bisping. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, Brian, you mentioned all the advantages that line up in Bisping's column, and it's true. And anybody who checks out my Uber tail of the tape over in the premium section, you're going to see that all the check marks are pretty much lined up under Bisping, with the exception of 2. And that is the power head strike accuracy of Kung Lee, which is abnormally high, and his knockdown power. He has 5 knockdowns to date. It's a 6% knockdown rate, which is above the average for the division, whereas Bisping, all his knockdowns have come from the clinch. So you wouldn't say he really has one-punch knockout power. But everything else, when it comes to the cardio and just the pace, the defense, even, believe it or not, his chin are all actually better than Kung Lee. So I think he probably would be able to do well in a scramble. I do think he's going to have a big stamina edge as this fight goes on. If it goes beyond round 2, assuming they're keeping up a pretty good pace, I think Bisping should run away with this. But you're absolutely right. He has been dropped before, and he's susceptible to those big kicks, those big one-punch shots that really stun him, that set up the finish. And Kung Lee, that is the one thing he's bringing to the table, I think, here, because otherwise he's really outgunned. He's really undersized. But because of his southpaw stance, his crazy kicks, that's the only way he wins this. You know, only less than 2/3 of his strikes are actually aimed at the head. So he's going to be doing body kicks, leg kicks. They're going to be all over the place. Bisping is much more of a pure boxer. He pushes straight forward, and he's also able to fight walking backwards. So, I think round to round, Bisping gets this. I think as these guys gas, the scales are really going to tip in Bisping's favor. And he might eventually take advantage of the 42-year-old chin of Kung Lee later in the fight, because Bisping won't fade the way Kung Lee will. Say what you will for looking like you have a Hollywood body, but those guys do not have the same kind of stamina as someone who's been in the gym. And 2 years is a long time to take away from the sport at this age for Kung Lee. So that's the way I see it. The price is certainly steep given the wild cards here. So a more particular play might be the best angle.
So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC Fight Night 48. Part 2 of the Premium Oddscast featuring our premium bets will be out Friday morning around 6 a.m. Eastern Time, so stay tuned for that if you're an MMAOddsBreaker.com premium member. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at Premium Oddscast on Twitter, because that's where we'll post them first. Now, we also have the at MMAOB_premium Twitter, so we'll be posting both of them there actually. So we can also notify you of our free bets via email if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsBreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Also, feel free to like our Premium Oddscast Facebook page. We post articles, show announcements, and plenty of other information there, so you can stay up to date on everything from us if you're interested. Special thanks to our sponsor, 5 Dimes. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.